Church. My name is Jeff Struecker, and if you found us for the first time tonight, we're a church that just began in the year 2020 doing weekly services in Columbus, Georgia. We exist both in Columbus, Georgia, and we have a presence in Phoenix City, Alabama. Well, that's actually not true. We have people from across the parts of Georgia and Alabama that are coming together to meet together and to worship King Jesus, both in person and online. This spring, we started a midweek broadcast that we call Lead Them Well. It began when the region shut down as a result of the coronavirus, and many families were at home, and parents wanted some additional information on how they could train their children up, how they could encourage their children. So we started this middle of the week broadcast, and we call it Family Bible Training. You can see on the screens right here that it is the idea of a parent handing their faith off to their children. So what we're trying to do is to just give you some tools, parents, to equip you to be able to talk to your children and to help them understand their faith. Help them to your faith to become their faith. Help your children to start to understand the Christian faith and start to believe it for themselves. We are currently in the middle of taking a hard look at the Ten Commandments. Now, we started 2 weeks ago looking at the word commandment, which, if you're not familiar with that word, if you didn't grow up in church, it just simply means the rules or the law of God. I want to encourage you to go back to 2 weeks, the broadcast from 2 weeks ago, and listen to that broadcast about why God created these commandments in the first place. Is God trying to be mean to us? Is He holding something back for us? We talked about all of that 2 weeks ago. And then last week, we began looking at the 10 commandments, one commandment at a time. So we looked last week from the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 3, about the first commandment. What is God's number one out of His top 10? What's number one on God's list? If you missed last week's broadcast, you can go back in our Facebook or YouTube or Twitch or Instagram channels and watch the broadcast from last week. This week, we moved to the second commandment. Of course, we're just moving right through chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, and each week we give you a Bible verse to first hear, and then we want you to commit this Bible verse to memory. Parents, we want to encourage you to commit this Bible verse to memory with your children, but we would also like for your children to commit this Bible verse to memory. So here's what we've done. We've created a closed Facebook group. This closed Facebook group is an opportunity for you parents to go ahead and record a video of you and your children, or maybe just your children, reciting a verse of the Bible from memory. And then you can share this video with family or with friends that don't live around you in this closed Facebook group. If you're not sure how to get into that closed Facebook group, the notes to this post will tell you how you can get into that closed Facebook group. But each week we give you a Bible verse to memorize. Last week that Bible verse was Exodus 20, verse 3. Tonight's Bible verse that we want the whole family to commit to memory is the very next verse from the Bible, Exodus 20, verse 4. And the way that we do this is I'm going to show you the verse on the screen in just a second. We're going to say the verse number, chapter and verse number, where it's found in the Bible. We'll say the entire Bible verse out loud, and then one more time we're going to say where it's found in the Bible, so that when you go to repeat this Bible verse months or years from now, you know not only what the verse is, but you know where this verse is found in the Bible. We're going to take a look at Exodus 20, verse 4. You ready? Here we go. Exodus 24. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or any image, of anything in the heavens or the earth or in the sea. Exodus 20, verse 4. Now, I just want us to pause for a second. We're going to talk about this one verse from the Bible, but actually, if you're to read Exodus chapter 20 tonight as a family, parents, what you will see is the Bible has a couple of more verses, verses 5 and 6, that God uses to give a little bit more background to this one commandment. Now, this is interesting because in the 10 commandments, usually you just have a do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that kind of an approach to the 10 commandments. You get one verse, and one verse gives you one commandment. On this commandment, however, there's one verse, don't do this, and then there's also some instructions that go along with that one verse. And I want to read for you those instructions from Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. Here's what the Bible says next. In verse 5, it says, you must not bow down to those images that you made. That's back in verse 4. You must not bow down to them or worship them. And here's why. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. I will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. I lay the sins of the people upon their children. The entire family is affected, even the children up to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me. But I lavish, verse 6 says, unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and keep my commands. Now, I just want you to know something about Bible times. When this passage in the Bible was written, people had like little statues that they would keep in their house on a family altar, and it would become a family place to worship. These statues were often to lesser gods, little g, gods with the little g, meaning multiple gods, many gods. Some gods controlled the rain, some gods helped the crops grow, some gods helped people have babies, gods of all different shapes and sizes for all different things. Many families in ancient Bible times, not the families of God's people, but many families around them had these little gods that they would place on an altar in their home, and they would worship those little gods. In fact, entire nations had some big statues that people were supposed to come to. They had temples, and they had giant statues that people would travel long distances to go worship those statues and those false idols. God makes it very clear. The second commandment is one commandment, and then he gives two more verses of information about this one commandment. And he says, I don't want you to make any kind of statue whatsoever, even if it was a statue that you thought looked just like me. I don't want you to make statues like that. And then he goes on to tell us why. He says that he is a jealous God. And that word jealous doesn't mean that he is angry or that other statues have something that he doesn't have. That's kind of the idea of being envious about something that you don't own. The word jealous that God is using in this passage basically says, I want what's best for you. And worshiping those false gods is not best for you. And because I love you and because I want what's best for you, I can't allow you to worship those false idols, those little statues, because those statues aren't best for you. I'm jealous for your best. I'm jealous for your good. That's how this word is being used. That's why I want you to worship me and only worship me, because those little statues can't give you what I can give you. And then he says something that really should blow our minds. He says, when families reject me, it will carry over for 3 or 4 generations. I'm the kind of God that when a family rejects me, that it not just affects mom and dad, but it affects their children, their grandchildren, sometimes even their great-grandchildren. But the idea here is the last verse in verse 6 is that when a family loves me, serves me, worships me, I take care of them. I bless them for 1,000 generations. We can't do enough great, 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 great grandparents to go out to 1,000 generations. I'm talking specifically to you parents now. I want you to hear from the second commandment how important your faith is to your children and your grandchildren. And if you think about it, perhaps the biggest influencer on your faith was not what they said, but it was watching grandma and grandpa. Or maybe it was watching mom and dad, and the way that they lived and the lifestyle that they lived had a really, really big impact on what you believe, parents. I feel certain that you want to have that kind of impact on what your children believe, and that's kind of what God is saying here. But he specifically attaches this to the idea of having these little false gods, these little small idols for family and at an altar in your home for your family. And really what God is saying here is, I'm different than those gods. I'm not like those gods. Even when Israel decided that they were going to build a place of worship, that they were going to invite people from all over the world to come to the temple and to worship God in an honor or in a proper way, even when Solomon was dedicating the temple in the books of Kings and Chronicles, God and Solomon was praying to God as a prayer of dedication for this temple, a proper way of worshiping God. Even then, God said, you know, all of the buildings on earth couldn't contain me. You can't build a statue that would ever fully express who I am. There's nothing in the human mind. There's nothing our hands can create. No paint on a canvas, no wood or no stone or no precious metal could ever possibly show just how great I am. So everything that we would create would somehow become a lesser God. Even if we were to put our whole life into doing the best we could to represent how great our God in heaven is, it would still be a small or a poor substitute to how great our God is. So he gives us the second commandment, not so much to punish us for doing wrong. He kind of gives it to make sure that we don't live like people that are not Christians, the way that they live. But he also gives us the second commandment because nothing that we made could ever possibly come close to God. Nothing, even our greatest effort, could even be the tip of the iceberg to show how great our God is. And so he just wants us to focus on him in our heart and with our time and our energy and our thoughts. So what I'm going to do now is give you an exercise to do with your children. Parents, if you have little ones, I'm going to give you an exercise for your younglings, for the elementary age children in your family. And if you have teens, I'm going to give you a second or a separate exercise for them so that they can remember this Bible verse, this second commandment. But parents, I want you to kind of do this in your own mind, maybe even to share your answers to these questions with your children. So if you'll gather your little ones around the tablet or around the TV right now, I want you to ask them to just think for a few moments about how much time they spent playing games this week. Maybe it was online games. Maybe it was games on a mobile device. Maybe it was games on a game console. Maybe it was board games. Maybe it was games in the yard. But just how much time did they spend from the beginning of this week until right now, whatever day of the week you're watching this broadcast, how much time did they spend playing games? And then I want you to ask them, how much time did they spend thinking about Jesus, studying about Jesus, praying to Jesus, just enjoying the fact that they are Jesus's children? Now, I want you to understand, parents, I want you to communicate to your children, God does not say that we shouldn't play games. In fact, I think God is pleased when his children are happy and enjoying themselves, even enjoying themselves in good, wholesome games. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just asking them to compare the amount of time that they've spent doing one thing with the amount of time that God gets. And then ask them the question, is something else starting to become more important than God? Is it starting to occupy more of their time, more of their energy, more of their thoughts than God? And if so, based on what we learned last week, maybe this thing is starting to take the place of God. Maybe it's starting to become an idol. It's not really a little small statue that we bow down and worship. It's actually something that's just getting more of our time than God does. This is an exercise for you to do with your little ones, parents. But if you got teens in the house and you're sitting around watching the TV right now, I've got an exercise for your teens to do. And teens, you can do this one on your own. In fact, depending on what kind of mobile device you have, it may do this for you. But I want you to just take a guess. Before you look at the screen time on a mobile device, I want you to just take a guess first. How much time did you spend on a mobile device? Specifically, if you own a cell phone, how much time did you spend on that cell phone this week? Now, maybe you were doing schoolwork on that cell phone. Maybe you were reading a Bible app on that cell phone. Maybe you were talking to friends and FaceTiming or doing a Skype meeting with family, and it could have been great things. But I just want to ask you, how much time do you think you spent on that phone? And then go back and check it against screen time and see if those numbers are even close or if you are way off of how much time you actually spent on the phone. But like we did with your little brother or sister, teen, I also want to ask you the same question. Did your relationship with Jesus get anywhere close to that much time this week? Did you spend time thinking about, praying, reading about, just enjoying? You don't even have to do anything, just enjoying your relationship with Jesus. Again, just like I did with the young ones, there's absolutely nothing wrong with spending time on your phone. In fact, you can do a lot of good. You can learn a lot of good things by spending time on your phone. But if it starts to push out the time that you're spending with Jesus, if it starts to become more important to you than the time you're spending with Jesus, then perhaps, listen to what I'm saying, perhaps you're violating the second commandment. And your phone has become the little idol. Not a statue, but it's been your phone, or maybe it's been a game console. Parents, I'm going to wrap up talking to you for just a second. I believe what the second commandment is demanding of us is exactly the way Deuteronomy chapter 6 says we're supposed to lead our family and love our children, and we're supposed to love God in such a way that our family sees it. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, the big, great Bible verse that says, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We're supposed to love Him with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. Jesus calls this the greatest of all the commandments. And then Deuteronomy 6 says something specifically to parents. It says, I want you to teach your children the commands of God. But here's how I want you to teach it to them, parents. You don't have to sit down and do a Bible lesson with them. You can teach it to them when you walk down the roads. You can teach it to them when you're watching TV. You can teach it to them while they're on a game console. You can teach it to them when your family is on a trip. You can teach it to them just in the very natural things of the way that you live your life. But Deuteronomy chapter 6 is asking you to hand the love that you have for God off to your children as you go about your day and as you do your things and as you do them together as a family. So really what we're doing tonight, parents, is we're gathering the family together at a family altar to do family worship. Except we don't have little idols, little statues that we're going to ask the whole family to bow down to. This video is just a way for your family to worship God together. And maybe it's encouraged you a little bit tonight, parents, to look at how much other things get your attention and how little God gets your attention. I hope that this video has been encouraging to you. The second commandment is simply saying, I am the greatest thing that will ever happen to you. So I don't want you to give your time and all of your energy and all of your thoughts to something else and not think about me. It's okay to do other things, but it's not okay to do those other things and forget about me, because those other things will never be able to satisfy you the way that I can satisfy you. I hope you were encouraged by what you've heard tonight. See you next week when we tackle the third commandment.